So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the very basics of learning Maya and learning a little bit about the interface, a little bit about how to make a primitive model and how to manipulate the different points and faces and edges on that model using some of the different tools for movement, for rotation, and scale. So let's get started here. So I've already kind of explained here that we've got maybe a picker tool. This is a lasso picker tool. This is a paint selection tool. Mainly we're going to be using this selection tool here. Also movement, the rotation, and scale. Something else to note is that you hover your cursor over this, it tells you what the hotkey is in the upper right hand corner of this little box here, and it actually even has a little movie for you to play if you want to learn a little bit more about the movement. So these tools allow you to double click on here, and there's different options for the tool. The interface also lets you click and drag some of these options out so they don't have to be docked to the interface like that. You can close that. So now you can see if I double click on the rotation tool for the options for that and scale, that'll open up in a separate window like that. Alright, so that's how you get to the move, rotate, and scale. The hotkeys for that, they've mapped that very conveniently for you, so it's Q, W, E, and R. So just with those few keys up there, you can rest your fingers on those keys and you can easily switch between picking, moving, rotating, and scaling. So the other thing that we've got here, we've got our menu bar at the very top, and there's a bunch of different tools and things within the menu that you're going to be able to do depending on what task you're trying to get done. So currently I'm talking to you mainly about some modeling functionality. So I want this to be in the Polygon menu set. You can see this little drop down here. If you change that, it'll actually change the options on the menu depending on what kind of task it is that you're trying to accomplish. So if you're mainly worried about animation, you put it on this animation menu subset, and this changes up here. If you're modeling, you're going to want to use polygons. Surfaces is for NURB surfaces, subdivision surfaces, I think things like that. Then we got dynamics for particles and things of that nature. We've got rendering specific stuff, and dynamics, which is more particles and surface simulation type of things. So again, we're going to want to use the Polygon menu set. So this, when you first get into Maya, it's going to be probably a little overwhelming for you just because of how many different tools there are. Just know that people can spend their entire career and just kind of focus in on being a really great animator or a really great modeler, or somebody that does effects and things like that. So it's good that you're going to eventually know a little bit about all the different areas within inside of Maya, but don't feel like you have to be an expert in every single area that you've got going on here. So again, we'll put it on the Polygon menu set. The other thing that we've got here is some different shelves, and these are different tools that live within here. And you can see it's kind of like this menu set here, where if you click on one of these, it gives you iconic representation of some different tools and things that you might use on a regular basis on there. So I'm going to click on here on polygons, and you can see it's got some of the different polygon menus for that. So just like any program file, if you want to make a new scene, you can do that. If you want to open a scene, saving scenes, there's even an incremental save, which is pretty important for you as a game artist. If you're making your files, you definitely want to save in increments, and probably save every 15 minutes to a half an hour at the tops. If you get a file that crashes, you don't want to lose any more than a half an hour's worth of work. So this incremental save really helps out with that. By the time I'm done with a project, sometimes I'll have anywhere from 50 to 100 different saved versions of that file by the time I'm done with that. So there's obviously a lot of different tools to be going over with inside of here, but we're just going to focus on some very basic stuff at the very beginning. So the first thing that we probably should cover and talk about is just navigating in this 3D world. So if you don't see a grid, you can turn on and off your grid here, or you can go under display and you can turn off your grid there. So you'll find out in Maya there's a lot of different ways to get to the same tools and do the same job in different ways. So I'm going to try to expose you to the different areas where you can maybe turn some of these options on and off. So let's just make sure you got a grid so you can kind of have some kind of frame of reference of what's going on in the world. And then we can tap our space bar and we can go to a quad view that you see over here. If we click this one here, that'll give us a top camera, a front camera, a side camera, and perspective. And then if you hover your cursor over any one of these windows and you want to zoom into it, you just tap the space bar. And if you tap the space bar, it exits out of that, and you can hover your cursor over here and quickly go between these different views that you got. Or you can leave all four of them open all at the same time. That's up to you. So let's hit spacebar over the perspective window. So the first thing we're going to look at is holding down Alt and the first mouse button. And if you click and drag left and right, that's going to rotate around your scene. So the next thing we're going to add, we're going to hold down Alt and middle mouse, click and drag, and that's going to pan your scene around like this. Okay. Now we're going to hold down Alt and we'll right mouse click and drag up and down, and you can see that's going to zoom for us. So definitely take a little bit of time and just get used to holding down Alt, left mouse, middle mouse, right mouse, so you can move, pan, and rotate around in your world. While you're doing this, I want you to notice that there's this little icon down here that says X, Y, and Z. So that's our dimensions in 3D space, right? So we've got X, and pointing out this way is positive X. This way, pointing down here, is positive Z. And going up in space is positive Y. Okay? So just get familiar with that, moving around, rotating, scaling, zooming in and out, because you're really going to need to just feel comfortable in this space doing that to operate within inside of Maya and manipulating your 3D objects. So I'm going to hit the space bar and zoom back out. I want you to do that as well. So I'm going to just have my cursor over here in these orthographic views. So an orthographic camera has no perspective to it at all, so that's our top, front, and side cameras. Now this is just a little bit different. We can hold down Alt and middle mouse and we still have the pan. There's no rotation in these cameras, so if we hold down Alt and the first mouse button, you'll see it gives you that little symbol you can't rotate. That's because it's an orthographic camera. But we can hold down Alt and our right mouse button and we can zoom in and out. The other thing we can do to zoom in and out, if your mouse has a scroll wheel on it, you can do the scroll wheel and that'll zoom in and out. And you can do that for any of your windows. So it just depends on how you feel comfortable with things. The only thing I don't like about the scroll wheel is that it kind of zooms in and out at these increments, and I like a smooth, nice transition for that stuff. So whenever you hold down Alt and your right mouse button, that allows you to do that. So again, you're going to have to get very familiar with panning and scaling in and out like this to get your self to where you can kind of navigate around in the world a little bit easier. So I'm going to go hit the space bar and come here like this. And the first thing we're going to do is take a look at making a primitive object. We're going to make a just a cube. So let's go under Create and then go to Polygon Primitives. And I'm turning off this interactive creation. I'll turn it on real quick just so you can see what that does. I'll say Polygon Primitives Cube. With that interactive creation thing, it wants you to click and drag out and then push up to form a cube. And that's I think 3D Studio Max, that's kind of where that workflow kind of comes from. And it is possible that you could snap to the grid whenever you're doing this. So hold down X and I could drag out like that. Because X, when you hold on X, it temporarily turns on the snap to grid options. So you can create stuff that way. I'm just not a fan of that, so I'll show it to you, but it's up to you if you want to use that or not. I'm actually going to go create Polygon Primitives, and I'm going to turn that interactive creation off. And so if I go create Polygon Primitives Cube, And then we're going to look at the option box. So you can notice that anywhere in the Maya's interface you'll see this open square thing. If you click on that, it gives you options for whatever that tool is. So we'll click and load that thing up. And I'm just going to make the width and the height, I'll make this 10 units by 10 units, by 10 units, like this. And we could change something about the subdivisions width. Let's put that at 2, and then the height, we'll do 3, and then the depth, we'll do 4, like that. And then this axis for how we create this, remember Y is up, so I've got that set to this here. There's some other things for creating UVs and things like that. We'll just go ahead and hit apply, and we'll see what we've got for the options here. Okay, so it's created a cube for us that's 10 units by 10 units by 10 units. And the other video I showed you, we can set up our grid, and if we go to display grid option box, I've got currently my subdivisions, my length and width is set to 90 to push out how far out the grid goes. Grid lines every 30 units like this, and then the subdivisions are set to 3, and I don't have subdivisions visible, so I'll hit apply like that, and you can see that's going to show up for us. If I put this subdivisions to 30, actually let me do this here. I'll do we'll do 10 like this. So that means we've got a subdivision line every 10 units here. And if we go to the top and look, we've got this object. Let's do this every 10 units like this. Okay, so now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units on this side. So that makes sense for us. Our cube sitting in the middle, so it's 10 units by 10 units by 10 units this way. So if you want to be very specific about your scale that you're using, you're going to be able to do that, and you're going to be able to control your grid in this way. The reason I have this set up every 30 units is because we're working with Unreal Engine, and roughly 30 centimeters, a little bit more than 30 centimeters equals a foot. So I wanted to have something that would represent that. So it's up to you how you set up your grid, but I just wanted you to see how those units kind of play out inside of Maya. So I'm going to close down that grid thing, and we're going to go to the options again for the creation, so you can see when we set this up initially how it created this cube. Now the cool and interesting thing about this is over here in the channel box over on this area we have these inputs, so we can always click and get back to this thing, and this object has history on it, so we can actually interactively change these values now on the fly if we want. So if we want the depth to be 40 or so, something like that, you can always change those values as long as there's history on this thing, and you can update what is going on with this. Same thing with subdivisions. So if I wanted to change this on the width, I could change that, and the height, I could change that as well, and then the depth. So depending on what you're trying to get, you can change those values and get a more dense kind of cube like that. Let's just put these all to 2. So you can click here if you want to change multiple values at one time. I can click here, hold down shift, and then click here, and it lets me put in a value. So I'll just put in subdivisions with height and depth 1, and it just gives me a cube right now at that point. And I'll change the width, depth, and height to, let's just do 10 again. So we just got a regular cube. So you can see that we could have put all those values in here at the very beginning at the creation, or we can have some kind of value that we like for our cube every time we create a cube, and we can save that within here. So you can go edit, save settings, and now every time you go to create a polygon cube, let me delete that, and we'll go create Polygon Primitives cube, and you can see it's going to give me those creation options every time I create a cube. It's always going to have these values over here that are live. The other thing that I wanted to show you real quick is that we can interactively kind of change these values by clicking on the names of this. So width, you can click on the name, you can see how it's highlighted, and now you can middle mouse drag left or right, and you can interactively visually change those values instead of having to type in the values for that stuff. So that comes in pretty handy. So like subdivisions width, you can kind of just middle mouse drag that, or the height and the depth for that. So that's another creation method. So I'll set that back to 10, and I'll set this back to 1 like this. Okay, so that's how to create the cube. Let's talk about just moving and scaling, right? So if we put on the move tool, we'll get this manipulator here. And you can see any one of these arrows will tell you, like, if I just want to move in just Y and nothing else, I can click on this part, the arrow, and move that up. And it won't move anywhere else other than, sorry about that, deleted that. It won't move anywhere else but the Y axis. And if I want to move on Z, I can do that. If I want to move on X, I can do that here. And you can see these values update in the channel box over here. We'll look at inputting some numeric values in just a second, but let's keep talking about these tools here that we have. The other thing is you see these little tiny planes, and what that allows you to do is you can click on one of these planes, and it's actually saying, I want to move in this axis and this axis both at the same time simultaneously, but I don't want to move in the other axis. So we can click and drag this thing around, and you can see that it's going to move in Y and Z. Take a look at the channel box and see those values change, but it's not moving in X, right? So if I go to this plane here, I can move around, and I'm moving in X and Z at the same time, but it's not moving in Y. This one will allow me to move in X and Y, but leaves the Z dimension alone. Now this box in the middle that's kind of based off of, this box is always facing the camera, is going to move the object in camera space, so you can just click and drag it, and it's moving it, like I said, based off of what your vantage point is in the camera. So I'm going to hit undo to get us back to that original spot. So there's movement, and we have rotation, which is very similar. So you can see it's got these different rings around here where we can rotate in just X. You see it's color coded for us. If I want to move in Y, we can do that like that, and then blue is the Z dimension, so we can rotate those. And if I want to do a free rotation, kind of like that movement in the camera thing, you can use this yellow outer manipulator. And if we click on this kind of grayish line, it'll do it as well. I don't use that very often. I usually want to be pretty specific about how I'm rotating and doing that kind of stuff. So the other thing is we've got scale. So we'll put it on scale. And so this is you can scale in just one dimension like this, kind of like the movement tool, or you can do the middle cube, and that does a uniform scale for the entire object. Or we get those planes, and again we can scale two axes at the same time. So that's pretty cool, and we can kind of scale that thing out. It produces maybe something that's more like a wall. And again, we can go to any one of these planes and scale those two axes all at the same time. Okay, so there's something about the movement, rotation, and the scale on that, and you're starting to look at these values and see how those relate to what's going on over here in the channel box. Now, it is possible with the channel box, just like what we looked at down here by interactively changing some of these values. You can click on the name, and you can middle mouse, and you can interactively change some of those values like that. So that's a possibility for you. But then if you want to just type in a very specific value, so if I want to go 0.25, I'm going to be able to move that object over by that amount. 0.5 for translation in Y, let's just say maybe 2, and translation in Z, I could do like a negative 0.5, and you can see how you can get very, very specific about where the placement of that object is. Same thing for rotation. We could do a 5-degree rotation on here, And then we could do a 25-degree rotation on this, and then do a 90-degree rotation here. So same thing. You can be very, very specific numerically about how you translate, rotate, and you can also do the same thing for scale. So you could do 0.75 on here, whatever values you want to try out. You're going to be able to do that and manipulate this thing. So I'm going to change this stuff all back. This is translation, put that back to 0, rotation, put all those back to 0. And again, I'm just clicking on the top one, holding down shift, and then clicking, and it allows me to change multiple values at one time. So scale, type 1, like that, and then now we've got our scale back. Okay, so that's a little bit about the object level of how we're working, because we're working with an object right now, but it is possible to get down to finer levels of fidelity and finer levels of control over these objects after they've been created. So we'll look at that next.